I'm glad to be here. And as a social scientist, the part of this water issue that I work on is people. So what I research, what I study, what I think about all day long is the factors that lead people to participate in these technical solutions that we're talking about here today. So whether they adopt or not what we're talking about. Okay, so I know Dr. Nick Taylor is following me today, and he'll share some really great information about the quantity of water that people use with their irrigation systems. What I'm talking about today is irrigation restriction policies that limit the amount of or the days that people can irrigate their lawns throughout Florida. And people really come into play with the efficacy of these policies. So much of the state of Florida is under irrigation restrictions where they can water 1 to 3 times or 1 to 3 days a week, depending where they live. And what really matters is that people have to choose to comply with those policies for them to achieve their potential impact. Um, so people make or break whether they're effective, and that has a lot of implications for long-term water supply goals throughout the state. I'm going the wrong way. So the way that I look at behavior change or adoption, or essentially people's participation in irrigation restrictions, whether they're going to comply with these policies, is not black and white, but rather it's a journey. So we can think about residents all over Florida and how they kind of navigate irrigation restrictions that apply to them. So rather it being either they don't comply or they comply, here's what they do. They go through a 5-step process where first they need to have awareness of these policies. They need to have adequate knowledge of these policies to move on to form an opinion. We hope that that opinion is positive and that they move on to the third step in this process and they make a decision to comply. Ideally, and what we want for everybody under these policies is that they make that decision, they follow through, they comply, they save water, and then they go on to decide that's a good thing and they're going to continue doing it. So the research that I'm sharing asks a couple questions about this journey. And the first question is, do residents throughout the state of Florida have adequate knowledge to move on from this first stage to go on to form an opinion? And the other question I've been really interested in is, do Florida residents form positive opinions or positive enough opinions that they make a decision to comply with irrigation restriction policies? So that's some of the information I'll share with you in these couple minutes here. The data I'm sharing is from a quantitative annual water research panel that I've been leading for about 13 years, where we ask Floridians all about their perceptions and their conservation and irrigation practices. The specific data that I'm going to hone in on is from adult decision makers who decide how their yard is irrigated, and they all have in-ground automated irrigation. So these policies apply to them. Okay, so to answer that first question, this is data from 2 years of that survey that I mentioned. So we asked these Floridians whether they had irrigation or whether there were irrigation restrictions in place that affected how they water their lawn and landscape. Now, because of filtered down to for this data, the answer for 100% is yes. Everyone should have said yes. But if you'll see here, we have kind of a pattern where only about 50% said yes. So 1 and 2. About 40% said no, absolutely not, and 6 to 10% weren't sure. So that kind of paints a picture of kind of what's going on if we think about that process to get to compliance. So going back, think about that. 100% of these folks are subject to irrigation restrictions. So 1 out of every 2 doesn't have the awareness to move on in that process. They're not thinking about it, they're not forming an opinion. So that sounds kind of dire, kind of negative. So let's focus on that second person, that person that does know that there are irrigation restrictions that apply to them. So we went on and we asked, what do you think about these policies? And using one of the theories that I like to work with a lot, we quantified those perceptions using 5 attributes. So we asked them, what do you think about this behavior of complying with irrigation restrictions? Is complying better than not complying? Is it compatible with your values and the way you take care of your yard? Can you see the outcomes of complying? Maybe your neighbor does it and you can see whether it's a good or bad experience for them. Is it something you think you can try without spending a lot of money or making a big commitment? And do you see it as being simple? Okay, so when we quantify those 5 perceptions I just shared with you, things relatively positive. Things could range from -2 to +2. Most things are kind of hovering right around 1. So positive, not super, super positive. But and we ran a multivariate model to see which of those 5 perceptions actually predicted whether they planned to comply with their irrigation restrictions. And we found that 2 of those characteristics were really important with predicting compliance. The most important characteristic of whether our Florida residents were planning to comply with the irrigation restrictions that applied to them was whether they thought it was something that was simple to do. They can understand the policies and they can operate their technologies to come into compliance, to water on the days that they're allowed. The other thing that was significant was if they saw the complying with irrigation restrictions as being better than not complying. So a lot of times this comes out in terms of they understand that will save water for their household and on a larger scale. Some of the Floridians we talk to also will mention things like aesthetics, like avoiding excess weeds, pests, and diseases because they're not overwatering. Okay, so this is a really quick snapshot into kind of some of what we've learned about what sort of drives compliance or prevents it. But to return to, I think, this point that half of those that are subject to irrigation restrictions are aware of them, only half of them. So awareness is a huge barrier to a lot of people complying with these irrigation restrictions. And for those who are aware of irrigation restrictions, there are some significant barriers to their making that decision to comply, to actually getting to that behavior. So complexity in understanding both the policies and operating the technology is number 1, and then inability to see the advantages. A lot of people are worried about their grass going brown, and they just don't think it's worth complying to give that up. A lot of people really value that. So we need a lot more research on this. But there are things that we can do. The outcomes of these irrigation restriction policies can be improved if we incorporate public awareness and perceptions that we're starting to get a picture of here. So policies and education should really be aligned with residents' preferences. And I think we can really think about kind of 2 subpopulations here. We've got those folks who have no idea that these policies exist. And then we have this other population that they're aware, but perhaps we could improve their perceptions about them and help them to see things differently. So kind of my question is, can we make these irrigation restrictions simpler for people in coming into compliance? And can we help them to see the advantages of complying? I have no time to talk about this, but next step in this research program, we're doing some kind of fun message testing, varying the simplicity of our messaging to see how we can impact people's perceptions about irrigation restrictions. And it's kind of a snapshot of perceptions and awareness, and this is specific to irrigation restriction compliance. But as we have conversations over the next couple of days, I would encourage you to think about the fact that there are human dimensions to every technological solution that we think about, and the best solution in the world is only going to be as effective as the people that will